I build gadgets, technologies that can hopefully save the world. We often joke in the lab that I don't think we have saved many patients or individuals yet, but we try. And I think this talk is mostly about how we try and how we recognize how the limits of our trying can inform our understanding of the limits of technology and the possibilities of accepting the reality of Jesus Christ as somebody who can save the world. What you see here are Lego blocks that we deploy to use as lab-on-chip platforms so that laboratory techs in the developing world can make their own diagnostics. We have things such as solar-powered autoclaves that can sterilize medical instrumentation in the middle of nowhere. Smart diagnostics that instead of saying yes and no, display encrypted codes so that tuberculosis patients can stay on their meds, and in return we give them cell phone minutes. And little boxes filled with toys and prototyping kits so that nurses and doctors and healthcare workers in developing countries and in our own country can come up with their own ideas about what medical technology should be, instead of relying on what we often come up with at MIT and other places in the developed world that we think ought to be. And this takes me to my first point, which is traditionally we think of technology to save the world, or technology to affect the world in any way, as being best brought by those experts sitting in places like our institution, coming up with all sorts of different ideas, whether it's space robots or nanotechnology or quantum physics, that then we just deploy to the world. It's our gift to the world, our export, if you will. And largely, we see the fruits of that. The computers that we use, the gadgets that we wake up to and go to sleep with are often the result of those efforts and efforts of people like ourselves and what you may do with your own careers. We try to take that a second step, and when we go to a developing country, we realize that we lack that type of brain trust that we enjoy over here and the resources that we could deploy otherwise. And we often end up in places like this, where there is simply nothing. There is no inspiration, there is no lab, there is no capital equipment. And instead, we run into people's own idealized view of what their inventive possibilities are. And in their world, what I find when I go down there is that they have no problem accepting their own limits and of accepting that even though they can also come up with ideas, their brain trust often becomes a prayer to find inspiration, to come up with a better idea. And it's not a mark of their limits, it's a mark of their possibilities. The Bible tells us that because as He is, so we are in this world. And that means that if they believe that, their impact on the world can become just as big as God's impact on the world. And I'm actually a technology optimist. I think we've all seen graphs like this, where technology is just on this exponential ride where we can all collect the jetpacks at the end of this evening and fly off into outer space. And there's wonderful quotes. Niels Bohr said, technology has advanced more in the last 30 years than in the previous 2,000, and the exponential increase. And I think every 10 years somebody else comes up with a better version of that quote. What I find when we go down to places in the developing world where there is poverty and suffering and challenges is that largely it's often not about the gadget and it's not about the technology. It's actually a lot of other things that matter. And one of those things that we look for is insight. Insight to develop new technologies is often, at least for me as a Christian, inspired by the example that Jesus gave when He walked on this earth, because He taught us to care. He taught us to look at the lowest common denominator of a population and care about that population instead of just hanging out with high-end intellectuals who would parse the nuances of the Old Testament. He cared about people who hadn't even read the Old Testament, and he made a difference. And experiments that take that insight out of a society and the insight that the reality of Jesus can affect a society have proven to be failures. You can, throughout history, you can see many forms of societies where it tried to take that away from societies, or try to take the possibilities of a belief in the Christian faith outside, and more often than not, they struggle. But often they endure and they come back stronger. And it's never about the gadget. It's about the insight. The other thing that we often recognize is that it's less about the hardware and it's more about the intangible. And so the charts that I showed previously, which show that, hardware and technology and gadgetry is advancing at an ever-increasing pace, are all true, and the statistics are there. But when we look at our own lives, that chart doesn't look like that at all. And when we look at our parents' lives and our grandparents' life, the chart is more about a series of oscillations, of ups and downs. And what I find as I lead my life as a scientist is that Jesus talked about that, and he predicted that that's exactly what's going to happen. And he said, you will have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. In other parts, it says you will walk through the valley of death. It's not a matter of if, it's about when. But there are answers to that. And then finally, what we find is that largely it's about hope. For those individuals that don't have the brain trust, that don't have the resources to find out how to solve these problems, it's less about the intellectual challenge of our own experiments, where if we run up against a wall, we can often chalk it up to, well, science will take care of it in the next generation. Because for those nurses and for those patients and doctors in the developing world and in other places where suffering and poverty are a reality, it isn't very much about them and about the now and about what can we solve. And hope cannot be manufactured. But there is a certain confidence in knowing that at a certain point you don't have the answers, but you make a very determined choice to rely on something bigger than yourself. And in my life, that's exactly how I conduct my own professional challenges. I think on paper, I'm woefully underqualified for what I do, hence I use toys. But when we go down to the places where we try to make an impact, I always remind ourselves that it's really not about what I can do. It's about what the God that I believe in can do it through me. And in the end, you'll make up your own mind about Jesus and technology, and about its ability to have an impact in the world or not, and the impact and the ability of other institutions that matter perhaps more than what you may think of your own belief systems. But to be sure, one of the things that will immediately crystallize your conviction about your position will be when saving the world is really about saving yourself. And in my case, as a Christian, I witness how technology and medical professions and the medical sciences gave me a very low score of surviving a complicated premature birth, oxygen loss, cognitive impairment predictions, and my parents, my family had a choice. They could believe medical science and they could believe the best gadgets that were available in Honduras at the time, or they could believe what a hopeful group of believers in the Christian faith held to be true, which is that Jesus came to heal and to solve the intangible and to have a belief not in the powers of the experts, but in a higher power. And when your own life is on the line that often gets blurred between the satisfaction of solving it on your own and the satisfaction of just having somebody solve it for you becomes very, very real. And that's why, as a Christian, I believe that technology can get us very, very far, but not far enough without my Christian beliefs.